Thanks for tuning in to this episode of I Have Something to Say, where subject matter experts are unafraid and unapologetic about sharing their perspectives regarding issues that impact our lives. They speak up because basically they give a shit. So if you're tired of canned answers and want to finally hear real people cut through the BS and talk about real issues, this is the podcast for you. I'm your host, Sami Heyman Marrero from Urbender, and behind our mixer is our producer, Chris Majoka from You Do You. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited today. We have a very special guest all the way from Toronto, Canada. She's Nancy John, the CEO of Seed Leadership and co-founder also. And this is an organization that's focused on developing future leaders. So they're into coaching, but with a twist, like a big twist. And we're going to get into that in a minute. The topic of today's relational introvert and seed leadership development. And I just want to take a moment to say thank you. Thank you for joining us today. How are you, Nancy?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. And so, Shalanda, give us the backstory, because there's a backstory to basically every guest that we have on this podcast. How are you, Mama? Good?
I'm good. Hi, everybody. Well, the backstory is that, the power of technology and LinkedIn. So we've all mentioned Kelly, our Mondays with Kelly, that we're so addicted to because it's such an amazing community of people. And that's where I kind of got a little glimpse of Nancy. I was like, I like what she has to say. And then I kind of stalked her a little bit on her profile and I was like, wait a minute. She's in IO psychology. I'm studying IO psychology. She's a coach. She's doing training. So we had a lot in common. And so we reached out and connected. We had a conversation. And it's like when you find a long lost friend that you've known forever, you just met, it's like, oh, I see you. You see me. It's awesome, right? So here we go. We're friends now, right?
Yeah.
And she's on I Have Something to Say, and we're looking forward to doing future stuff together. So this is really, really exciting.
Yeah, welcome, Nancy. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing great. Yeah, it was actually really cool to connect with Shalanda because actually the topic that connected us even on the chat with Mondays with Kelly was around introversion, right? I had somehow something came up about introverts and I talked about the podcast that I have, and then she said certain things and we're like, okay, we need to talk. And then we figure out that we both have this, a little bit of a common soul sister piece on that introversion thing. And we just hit it off in that way. So it's really great. And I heard a lot of great things about you, Semi, through Shalanda. So then here we are.
The same here. Fantastic. So tell us a little bit about why and how you launched Seed Leadership, like the big why, right? Because we all go into entrepreneurship or into, our own projects and seize the bull by the horns because we see something that needs to be done.
Yeah.
And so how did it come to be? Because I know that, something ignited, that spark, to take action.
It actually, to be honest, for us, it was a passion project for both my husband and I. And actually the work around Seed Leadership and the thought process around it started back in 2006. And we always knew that we wanted to do work around developing future leaders. We would talk a lot about our own experience coming through university and high school. And as we worked in the same areas of coaching and people development, we realized where the gap existed. And so we always felt a desire to be working there. And people actually also sought us out. We actually worked and did coaching with people even before any of this started, even before Seed Leadership was a thing. So it was always there. We knew that we were always attracting people in that way as well. But I always tell people, I lack the courage to take any action around it. So things life goes on, right? And so life just kept going on. Other stuff comes up. But then last year, it's just one of those things I say, both courage and circumstances lined up. And so, and I think there comes a point in your life where it was just the calling inside was just getting stronger and stronger. And I was, you just have to take an action on something or make a decision that I'm not going to do anything about this and I'm never going to talk about it again either. Yeah, one, it was just one or the
It's
other.
either or. Yeah.
It's either or. I said, there's, this is a long time to be talking about it. So then that's how it started. And I even now, and I say this as an entrepreneur to anybody else starting something out, sometimes right away and it shapes right away. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you try something and you're like, I think I'm getting closer, like that hotter, colder, like it's one of those things that you realize and you work through it. And I think that's what seed leadership is to me, is as I continue to work with people, I'm honing in who it is I'm serving. I'm honing in the work that I'm doing and really making that connection so that it's connecting to my heart. And then then the work doesn't seem like work anymore. I don't know if that makes sense.
Totally. It totally makes sense.
It's making that connection. And I feel like my podcast, even though it was not the intention, is helping me do this. I kind of bring these things together. So I really encourage people, you don't always have to have it all perfectly lined up. You can actually go with what give a few things a try, and then work it along the way. And I think that's sometimes what holds a lot of people back, because they feel like my plan needs to be perfect. And if my plan doesn't have everything ironed out, then I'm not doing the right thing. And I want to say that's not how it works. Yes, you sacrifices by doing that. And there's a slower pace that you take with that. But the joy that comes with doing it and kind of where you land with that is actually, it goes beyond your business. And I think that's also another thing that I want people to know, is you can do things in your life that your business is like an outcome of that. And that's the journey that I'm taking in about a year since I started Seed Leadership.
That's awesome. I'm listening to you speak, and I feel like it's like having kids. Either you decide to have them or not, and it's never the right time, right? Like you always want to have the house, you want to have all of these things lined up, but I mean, it's like a lot, so it's never the right time.
Right.
So it's kind of like the same feeling, right? That fear, and you have to, develop that courage to say, okay, that's it. I'm just going to take a deep dive, or like you say, just completely say, okay, then I need to move on and just let it go, because it's going to gnaw. It's worse because it's just gnawing at you. Right? That inactivity is not healthy.
It's interesting because as you were talking, Nancy, it reminds me of what Sammy, she's the activator in the group. I'm the process person. And so she's like, we've been talking about, can we just activate and then calibrate? Can we just activate? Let's just start doing it. And we'll just fix it as we go along. So, it's not going to be perfect. And that's one of the things I've learned from her. And hopefully she's learned from me that once we activate and calibrate, we need to get some processes in place. It's a nice balance.
So what exactly are you focused on? Because I know you do mentorship and coaching and leadership development. And so what is your end goal? Like, what is your end goal? What, like, in a ideal world, when you look back, what do you feel this was my legacy, and you'll see the outcomes and say, I can celebrate because I've left my mark. So what does that look like?
It's interesting. I've realized something about myself, is that that's a question that I can't articulate very well. And for the longest time, I think that's the challenge I had, is when people would talk about, when you think forward 10 years, 20 years, and some people are really good with like a crisp, even if it's not like perfect, but they can kind of crisply describe this is what it looks like. And for me, I couldn't describe it sometimes. And I remember thinking, like, does that mean I'm not visionary? Do I not have a vision for something? And I realized that that's actually not true. I'm very much of a person that is, and I've thought this pretty much most of my life because I want to be more logical about things. But there's a big part of me that's feeling operated, which I actually thought a lot, right? Because feelings are not always easy to articulate to somebody. And so then I felt like if I can't articulate it, then that means this thing is not real. And so what I've realized is that when I think about the idea of leaving an impact comes up for me. One of the things that I've wanted to do is how could I help build leaders in developing communities? But I don't really know exactly what that looks like. So what I've decided to do is, what steps can I take right now that are kind of in that space, but it will become clearer. And I think that's what, as I mentioned, I talk about this podcast that I have. It's really been pivotal for me from a learning experience. I did my podcast purely with the intention of running the experiment. And that's not my line. It's somebody else's line that just really encouraged me. And I said, well, Nancy, that's not your strong suit, right? Like to your point, Shalonda, I'm also like, what's the plan and where are we going to end up? And what's it all going to look like? And this was a leap for me in a different direction. But to say, what if instead of thinking about all these other end goals, I decided to say it will be about running the experiment. It would be about the process, enjoying the process and what comes out of the process. And I said, okay, let's do that then. And so I did it. And so within 2 weeks, I had the podcast up and running. I don't know anything.
Share with everybody what the name of the podcast is.
It's called Relational Introvert. And I had this idea of a podcast a while ago. But again, anyone who starts a business knows you're like, okay, I'm going to prioritize my time on income generating activities, business generating activities, like those are the things. The podcast was not top priority for me. But I talked to just a couple people who helped me to see it in a different way. And so that made me just go, oh, okay, is there another way I could look at it? And then I started to think about not just my business. I started to think about life. Sometimes, actually, no, most times we segment everything in our life, right? We're like, we have the family person, we have the businesswoman, we have the, fun, like friend, everything is so segmented. And so what I was starting to realize was I had some bigger work that I was looking to do. And I was already going in that direction that had to do with Nancy as a person.
Right.
And so I kind of went up this, and said, what if I was to focus here? All of these other things will start to make sense.
Come together.
And so the podcast was part of that work for me to say, what if you were to just try something? And what if you could, instead of sitting here and going, I can't see the horizon. You were like, let me just take 2-3 steps, and all of a sudden the horizon becomes clear, and you decide, do I still want to go in that direction, or maybe I'll go, a little bit to the left. But sitting back here, I can't see clearly enough, and so that's why the question of 10 years, what do you want to see 10 years from now, or when you look backwards, those become harder questions for me to articulate sometimes because I don't know the answer completely. I have a feeling about where I'm going. And so right now, some of the work, I do a lot of one-on-one, most of my clients right now, one-on-one coaching. And I find that I am currently working with folks who are not necessarily new to leadership, but they are at a bit of a pivotal point. Either they've taken on something new, like a next level in their leadership.
Yeah.
They're trying to figure out what to do. But most people are really at a point of questioning, and they're kind of figuring out, what does this mean about me based on how I am? Am I the best person? So a lot of us have questions about our ability and our worth whenever we are faced with something new. And I found like that's where I'm ending up, working with people. What I'm realizing, though, is I'm looking at this to say, is there a place for me as I think about the work that I do? My podcast, as I said, is Relational Introvert. And it's really about, being an introvert myself, there's a lot of preconceived notions people have about introverts. And, some are true. I'm not saying everything is that. Some are true. Some are not so true. And people have this thought around introverts being people who don't like being with people. And I thought, well, that's really true. We have just a different approach.
We have varying degrees.
Right? With varying degrees. And so I said, so that's why I came up with Relational Introvert, because I actually see us being quite relational, but just have a different approach around what that looks like. And I wanted to give a voice. And so it just I started to realize that all the desires that I had to do were I'm starting to do that just in a very niched way here.
Yeah.
And so now as I think about, and I never had any intention of my podcast was nothing really to do with my business. I wanted to keep it in the leadership sphere, but it wasn't really there. But now as I'm thinking about that, I said, okay, is there an opportunity for me as I think about this to help people who might feel like my voice doesn't count?
Yeah.
Right. Is there an opportunity to help in that space? And there are a lot of quieter leaders that we discount because they don't fit a certain mold.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I think there's an opportunity to say, you don't have to become somebody else to shine with what you have. And that's not me taking away from the extroverts, because I loved what you said, Shalonda, about how you and Semi connect, because
Mm-hmm.
I have activators in my life and I really love them because they help push me in a certain way where I probably would have been like, I'll take my time. And they'll come along and be like, no, what about this? What about this? And you're like,
Yeah.
but they appreciate me because they're like, Nancy, I appreciate how you can calm me. I appreciate how you can make me take a step back and go, oh, how does that feel if I was to approach it that way? How does that person feel?
Right.
So to bring those two together, but I feel that in the world that we're in, there is a vision of what that leader looks like. And so then when I think about developing leaders, I think about even in like a developing community, even if we think about what's happening in our world right now, think about raising up leaders. If all the leaders are just the loud ones, and when I say loud, I don't mean the ones who speak up. I'm talking about like, you have to look a certain way like this.
Right.
Then everyone who might actually have a quieter, powerful voice will never shine through because they're trying to fit into this other mold of being somebody.
Right.
And I want to demonstrate that you don't need to. We all have to stretch. There are times I have to stretch and do things that are not comfortable to me, but if I'm in line with who I am, I will be willing to take the stretch. But if you're like, Nancy, you have to be this person, that I'm starting to realize you probably don't want me. You probably want this person, and we both will be happier off that way. And so what's happening for me is as I'm developing this, my business is developing. I'm starting to figure out who do I want to work with? Who do I want to support? And yeah, it takes time, but I'm actually so grateful. Like, yes.
And happy. And happy.
I'm happy, right?
And
Like,
happy.
I'm like satisfied in a way. Like, yes, I've left. We had to make financial decisions because right now, with me not holding down my corporate job, that meant we cut our income in half. And so that means we had to make adjustments accordingly. But I'm so much more happy. So I tell people, so when people say, well, how's your business? I'm like, well, depends on which side you want me to answer from. Do you want me to answer the traditional answer, or do you want me to tell you my holistic answer of me as a whole person? Because I feel richer than I have in a very, very long time.
Yeah.
And I know that I'm at the cusp of something. So it's not that I feel like I know things are coming and generating. Like, it's really awesome.
You can feel it, right? Isn't it
Mhm.
awesome that you just know and you feel it in your gut? The gut doesn't lie. It's there for a reason. I feel it's more useful sometimes than the brain because it's connected to the heart, more, you know. And so that's awesome. That's really awesome. And I agree with you. There's this power in what we called when we were prepping for this podcast, the quiet ones, that many times is overlooked. And we find ourselves at times in meetings, for example, even with new prospective accounts, where we're feeling the room. Shalanda tends to be very quiet, taking notes, but then watch out when she opens her mouth at the end, because then it's on. So everybody just looks at her like, okay, everybody brace yourself. No, I'm just kidding. But because that means it's like chop chop, right? But we also are very intentional in trying to draw out feedback from the quiet ones in the group. Like we found ourselves in business meetings where we see, this has happened, several times, at least in the past few years, that we're like, well, what do you think? And people look at us like we have three heads, like, why are you asking her or him? Right? I'm like, because they're too quiet. And I'm sure that they have an opinion. It would be great to know because it could add value or not, but let's find out, right? And so I just feel like everything has value, and you'd be surprised at those leaders that are amongst you that you're just not tapping into. What a waste, of resources for people
and
that
missed
are
opportunities.
either missed opportunities. Absolutely. In Puerto Rico, we have a saying, and I translated it for this, that it says, "May the Lord help free me from the still waters, and I'll free myself from the turbulent ones." Because it's basically those quiet ones, those are the ones you have to watch out for. Because they haven't had or don't feel as free, to have that outlet. So, you want to dig deep and figure out, Lord,
Yes.
Lord, help me, Lord, free me from what they have to
Yes.
say, because it's
Yes.
probably spot on,
Yes.
whereas the loud ones like me, it's like, oh, you let them yap away, and then you could pick a thing or two, or it's like, is the bitch gonna shut up already? And I'll shut up now. Go ahead, go ahead, Yolanda. Your turn.
Well, the interesting thing is that, even like for someone who's quiet in a meeting, for example, I think sometimes people make an assumption around quiet, because quiet, whether you are, let's say, insecure or worried about what to say, versus quiet if I'm just absorbing. I'm just taking things, which is Shalanda, kind of like, it sounds like what you do. You're like, I'm just absorbing.
Yes.
I'm listening in. They look the same, so people assume both are the same. Because the person who's quiet doesn't always mean that they're afraid to speak up or don't feel safe speaking up. Sometimes it just means, like, at this moment I'm absorbing and I will wait to say something. And I feel that there's an opportunity for us to help even leaders of such people understand the difference. And you can know that once, because Shalonda, why she's quiet. You could probably pick up if she's quiet because she's just absorbing, or you could see, what, actually something's off. I feel like Shalonda would have said something here.
Yes. Oh my God.
You can
yes.
do that, right?
Yes. And I've actually learned from her. So I was invited into this leadership last minute meeting, in our region, to address the reopening, whatever. And make a long story short, some of the stuff that was being said on this call with like 39 people, whatever, I knew like maybe a couple of people on this call. I was like, oh, wow, I was invited to this thing. I guess I'm going places, right? But they needed, Black and brown representation. So I know I was there to, weigh in from the MBE standpoint, which is fine. But I learned from Shalanda to bite my tongue and not, because I'm quick to react sometimes when something doesn't sit well, and to really process it. You're proud of me, right, Shalanda?
I call it a moment of pause.
The moment of pause. And so then I digested what I was feeling over the weekend. And then I drafted what I wanted to say and I shared it with Shalanda. And then she fixed it up with me and she's like, no, 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 you need to change these words. And then we sent it and I got the feedback that I was hoping, and I feel like what I was able to say was a contribution, not a knee jerk reaction to what I was, and I explained it in the email too. I didn't speak up at the meeting because I didn't want whatever I was going to say to be misconstrued, or taken off or deviate attention from the task at hand. And so anyway, and I feel like it worked. I really do that. Feel like it worked, but a lot has to do too with being an MBE and sometimes feeling a room and not knowing, how people will receive your opinions. That also has sometimes impacted the way I, speak up. And I'm sure, I don't know if it's happened to you too, because you want to make sure that you don't get the rolling of the eyes or here they go again, or they're nitpicking at what I said, when that wasn't the intention, or what have you, Yeah. So it's an interesting dynamic for, for us too.
So for those listeners who may not be familiar with what an MBE is, it's a minority business enterprise. So usually organizations that are women owned or minority owned or veteran owned tend to fall in that category. And so when you're in these larger corporate environments, or particularly with what's happening now, and you're coming in representing as an MBE, there can be some preconceived perceptions as to how you're coming across. And I think, Sammy wanted to be mindful particularly within this current environment, what's the best way to communicate so we're keeping the conversation going and not offending anybody in the process. So
Exactly. Yes, absolutely. And we get that a lot, right? It's
yeah.
like they could spot us in a crowd. I love what you had mentioned as like you okay. So you've got an opinion about the following question when people meet you, or meet us, and we all do it.
We get it.
We get it. Yes, totally. Especially in cities like Orlando. I don't know how is Toronto very diverse too? Like
Very
a lot of people from. So there are a lot of transplants here. A lot of people like New York City. It's like very rare to find people that are born and raised here, and so you tend to say or ask people when you first meet them, "Where are you from?" And so that irks you. And now we can so tell me why.
So interesting enough, actually, the question, it doesn't irk me.
Okay.
But what I've realized is that I think the reason I want to have this conversation around this was because two parts. For those who ask the question, and to your point, like I've asked the question too, so it's not like it's a question I've never asked people.
Like it's taboo, right? It's not,
right,
yeah.
right. But I want people to understand that there are people who are okay with the question, and then there's people who are not okay with the question. And I think it's important to just even understand why that exists. So for me personally, I was sharing it actually with I was having a conversation with someone else, and one of the first things as we were chatting, and she lives out in the US, but she's from the UK, but she looks like me. And so she said for her, this question, she goes, I don't like this question. Like people ask this, she goes, I feel like, why is that the thing you need to know about me? Like, I don't understand why is that the thing you need to know? And so I could tell it was a source of irritation for her. And I don't know that I'd actually really taken a step back and thought about that question. And so then it made me start to think, and we actually had a really great conversation. And I said, you know what? I don't have the same reaction to that question. But I said, I can appreciate why you have that reaction. And so then I talked to a few more people. They had a different reaction. They were like, why is that the question? And so what I started to realize was, you know what, even among all of us who look and who sound different, there's different reactions. Surprise, surprise. We all have different opinions about things. And so I wanted to share that with people, is to say, one, understand why some may have a reaction, some don't. And it's important to then not kind of plaster one thing across everybody. It's this idea of just because one, sometimes people say things like, well, I have an Indian friend, or I have a Black friend, and so they said blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, then good for them. That doesn't mean that they, and it's good to understand that perspective, but don't assume that perspective applies to everybody that you speak to, just because that's the reality. We're human beings.
Right.
So for me, I think for me, the question isn't generally a source of irritation, because I look at the source of the question. I actually, if you can generally pick up the intent of the person who asked the question, right?
Yeah.
And so, for example, I think a really good example of that is last year, a few of our friends, like when we were able to travel, remember those days?
Yeah.
Last year, a few of my girlfriends, we went on a trip. We went to Greece. It was actually, it was milestone birthdays happening and stuff. So, we took a trip. And so you got to imagine, you have a bunch of brown and Black women traveling in Greece, and we obviously look different to a lot of there's, depending on which part of Greece you go to, you'll see more tourists. So in the more touristy areas, maybe not
right.
And some of the other ones we were. And so we went on a catamaran cruise, and on the way back, because it wasn't it was just a private cruise. Had a few other people on there. There was a couple there from Australia who we happened to be in the small bus that we were traveling from location to location. We just happened to you meet people, you start chatting, and we met on the catamaran, and so we continued chatting. And so I happened to be sitting next to them on the bus, and so the gentleman started to ask me questions, and then the question came up around like, where are you from, and so on. And for me, that question actually, I was completely okay with that question, because I just started to realize that I have a very different story. Like I was born in India, I lived in the Middle East, and then I came to Canada. And so I already have a really jumbled up sort of storyline of where I belong in a sense.
Yeah, right.
And so for me to share that, I actually was like, I felt good about sharing it so that he could see a perspective, like, people are everywhere and they can all show up in different ways. And I felt like I expanded something for him. And then he started to ask me questions. He goes, "Oh, so what do you consider home?" And there's really good questions. And I felt like that was a great opportunity. Like I look at it as like a bridge building. I said, I'm just expand this person's idea of what a brown person could be. Now, I also understand a different experience. For example, when I think about intentions in Toronto, when someone, and I don't have an accent, so my accent is a Canadian accent. If you then ask me, where are you from? Again, it depends on who asks you, but it can be a bit of a different connotation. I'm just like, well, then my answer becomes, well, I'm from Toronto, or I'm from Mississauga. Like that's the smallest city I'm from. And then if they dig in deeper, I'm like, oh, I know where you're going with this. But like, what's your background, right? Right. Okay. So again, for me, it's not. I'm okay. Like I said, I'm okay answering that unless I can pick up on the intention of the person asking me. And I'm like, I'm trying. If I'm solving some sort of weird curiosity you have about, then I might be a little bit more like, I might get a bit more stubborn and say, oh no, Toronto. Like I'm from Toronto. Like that's all I'm getting. You're not getting anything beyond this from me. If you need more, go and research. But then I also understand, like for example, I mentioned this lady that I had a conversation with, and she said, my issue is like, it was one of the first questions that they were asking me, are you Indian? Are you Pakistani? And she's like, no. And she's like, I'm now not going to give you a single answer. Like, why is this something, the initial thing you need to know about me? Even my sister, like, so she said, and this is what I thought was really cool, was because being sisters, also you can have different experiences around a single question. And she said, being a teacher, she had, someone asked her this question of like, oh my God, like, where are you from? And about like you something about her speaking English so well or something like that. And so those things are like, and again, you look at the person and you think about, okay, so you are someone who is raised here. Again, like we're a fairly diverse community. And so you're not an older person. Like you're not like of a different generation that you can say, oh, okay, I understand that.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
But so then I'm like, yeah, I can understand the source of irritation with that question, especially if you feel like that's a question that comes up first for people. And you're like, why is that the first question that you need to be asking? And so I feel the reason I want people to understand that there's two sides to the question is because that question has the possibility of making somebody feel like they are not actually natural here.
Yes.
They're different from the natural people here.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the kind of opportunity with the question, is to understand that both exist. And for most people who find an irritation with that question, what I've realized is that it's because they've shared, I'm okay with the question if you have some sort of relationship with me. If it's the first question you have to ask me, then I wonder, why is that? Like, that's the first thing you saw about me, and it's like the first thing you needed answered. Are there not other things that you do me? And then perhaps as part of that storyline could be what we uncover.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I also think that it could shut down the relationship building, especially with people that might not, because if you're an extrovert, you're like out there, whatever. It's like whatever, and so you're more open to not even notice what the intention behind it was.
Right.
It's like, oh, you want to chat? Yes, I'll tell you my life story. It's like, I can talk, okay, and then you just go for it. But if you're dealing also with people that are more observant, more reserved, that are not, for whatever reasons, it could be past experiences or just that's how their character is. Talking about sisters, my sister is more of an introvert.
Right.
She's very quiet, observes, very analytical, and she's also, I'm afraid of her too. But anyway,
Why are you afraid of all the introverts in your life?
because I'm telling you, I've had a lot of experiences with introverts, yeah, and they're wonderful people, but their power is
Yes.
harnessed,
Yes.
and so then when it comes out, watch out, and you want introverts in your life, because
Yes.
they're great out, they're the most loyal, like, yeah, you know, y- absolutely. So where I was going with this was that sometimes it's just people are curious. I want a conversation piece. It's like small talk. But at the end of the day, when you're building relationships of trust and that are genuine and that it's really because you're being respectfully curious, about the
Mm-hmm.
other person, want to really establish a collaboration or some kind of bond, right? That'll just come out in
Yeah.
conversation,
Yeah.
it'll just come out eventually in conversation, just by virtue of building that trust,
Mm-hmm.
because then you want to create, like in our case, a sisterhood. So I just want to know, like, I want to share more about me because I feel this kinship, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this comfort level that the more you know about me, the more I feel you got my back. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
That's just how I feel, and
Right.
so,
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think understanding the intent of the question is important. Yes, to your point, Sammy, if it's coming from a genuine place, that's fine. When I get irritated by that question is when I feel that the person is trying to validate me as a person or validate me being in a particular space or
Mm-hmm.
trying to categorize me. I recently had a conversation with some ladies that I play tennis with. Some of them know more about my background than others. Some people know I came from Minnesota, and they're like, okay, you from Minnesota? And I was like, yeah, I moved here from Minnesota. And to your point, Nancy, I might say, well, I took a 4-year detour to Florida through Minnesota because I'm originally from the US Virgin Islands. And
Right.
people get confused sometimes based on the context what I am. And I find that question usually comes up when people are trying to figure out, okay, exactly what are you? Like, where are you from? What's your nationality? And it even happened this morning at the USTA campus. I was like, really? I just want to play tennis, you know? So I had an hour where I beat the crap out of the ball because I was like, I can't believe I get up early to come and do something good for my mental health and well being, and I get hit with this question,
yeah,
you know? So,
yeah.
And I'm
so
sure your name, Shalonda, like I'm sure your name creates
oh,
more of
it
those questions.
confuses. Yes, it confuses people.
Yeah.
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 Like,
So now about the seed leadership, development. Before we let you go, I just wanted to ask you, developing leaders, and creating like this force. I feel like what you're doing is just so great. This
mhm,
force of like pulling out the best people have within them so they can be teachers and pause, like Shalanda
mhm,
says. How do you go about, doing that, to really help people bridge that gap and not create more antagonistic environments, but create a safe space where, I'll take the high road,
everybody
or I'll
feels
just.
included.
Exactly. So in those conversations, even though they might feel uncomfortable or you're still figuring out what the intent is, you could get the best out of it.
Mhm,
Right. So I mean, well, I think through one of the things through seed leadership that I'm focusing a lot in is helping people to even. I think the starting point is like the awareness of their own strengths, like what they bring to the table, and I think that's a lot of times why voices don't show up.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and when I say don't show up because of like inhibition, like not
Yeah.
don't show up because they're
mhm,
silent, but most of the times those voices don't show up is because there's this unawareness of what I actually bring to the table or a belief system that somewhere along the way, this is not what's needed. I need to completely shift from this and go this way. And that's what I'm recognizing is the opportunity. And so even as I think about one of the clients that I most recently worked with, I did, so I follow, it's not even an assessment that I've created, but I follow an assessment that's part of my coaching that helps people to see this, what you bring to the table. And at a certain point, she was in tears. And she said, I'm crying because I feel validated. She was, I just feel validated that because she was like, this is so me. And I had to tell her, I'm like, well, this is not any magic. Like, this is just based on your responses. Like, you have come to this, but she just needed to hear what she brings to the table. Now, it also talks about where are the places that you would need to adjust. So it's not that when we talk about bringing your, like, understanding yourself and your strengths, that's not to say that none of us have things to work on. Otherwise, we would never be able to work together because I just no, only my way, and then Sunny's like, no, only my way, and then that's what actually causes the divisions. But I feel sometimes we're so at a point of let me fix everything. Little people actually would you just naturally harness? There's certain things that you just naturally harness towards. And what if you kind of rode that wave? And if you rode that wave, then you might be willing to be like, okay, I actually want to approach that too, but that would mean me stretching that way. And I'm okay to do that because it's not a complete changeover of who I am, but I'm willing to stretch as well. And I think that's the opportunity. For me, the idea of, for me, the idea of like bridge building is really important. And again, I don't say this because everyone has to agree with me on it, but I just feel like there's an opportunity for us to have that way of thinking in bridge building. And when I even think about leaders, I think about, how can you actually develop that way of thinking in terms of how do we build bridges across ideas, across teams, across whatever it might be. But to do that, you got to start with a little bit of like, what do I bring to the table, and kind of just be good with what you bring to the table. And then you can take the steps to say, okay, now
I'm going to stretch. It's time to stretch. I'll stretch.
And this is a bridge I'm willing to build. And sometimes, sometimes someone might say, you know what, thank you very much, but I'm not interested in building that. And that's,
that's okay.
Like that's the decision you're making. So that's kind of where, for me, when I think about C leadership, the opportunity is. And as I think about even where we're at, and you talked about even the minority owned businesses and so on, even I am curious to find out a little bit about what are some things that you see are preconceived notions people have about owners who might be part of these businesses. But even in a situation like that, when you hear a certain thing about yourself long enough, whether it's true or not, you also start to believe it. And so part of me is like, is there a way that I could be part of the work of helping people to actually see who they what they truly bring to the table, like rather than actually believed what was true about you. And then you approach it that way. I think that's an opportunity to actually build leaders that are business owners, that might be teachers, scientists, like whatever, right? Like not everyone is called to be in corporate and do something like that, but I feel like there's an opportunity there. And so that's kind of where I am right now with where my mind goes. I don't have all the details of it, but like I said, I have an idea. Like I have a small idea right now. I'm going to propose to a few people. What do you think? And then I'm just taking I think that it will then flow from there. Whatever come out of it.
I think it's wonderful. Yes, absolutely. I think that it's that validation coming from someone in the outside, because sometimes we're so caught up, with all the bad feedback, that we lose, that self-reassurance.
A little bit of ourselves.
Exactly, about ourselves. This has been a wonderful conversation, Nancy. Oh my goodness. We got to do this again.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay. So
we built this human bridge from Orlando all the way to Toronto, Canada.
Yeah. We're stretching. We're stretching. It was fantastic. Thank you so much for coming onto the show. Okay.
Thank you for having me. You too.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye. This concludes this episode of I Have Something to Say. We want to thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to tell your friends about us. We're on Spotify and iTunes as well. There's more to come next week. And remember, if you have something to say, it's time to speak up.